Hello, Steve Puslik with the SharePoint Embedded Product Group. I want to focus on how eDiscovery works within your SharePoint Embedded environment. To get a better understanding of how eDiscovery works, a number of things that we need to consider that need to be configured as you're creating that eDiscovery case and adding the appropriate content that you want to use in that case. First thing that needs to happen is there needs to be an escalating event, meaning that you're being subpoenaed. There's some reason that you need to place content on hold so that it's not disturbed for the discovery process. That event is going to trigger a case being created. So as you're creating that case and managing it, the Microsoft eDiscovery platform has the ability to do that. When you create the case, you also need to identify where your data sources are. Now you can imagine that you have a case, you have thousands of employees that have thousands of mailboxes and SharePoint sites and OneDrive accounts and SharePoint embedded containers and so forth. Having the ability to narrow that down to what's relevant to the case, the people that are involved, the content that's involved, and so forth is a key thing that you need to decide initially so that you know which data sources to go after. Once you've identified those data sources, even within the data sources themselves, there can be massive amounts of content. Imagine in a SharePoint embedded container, you've got 10,000 documents that you want to place on hold, but within those 10,000 documents, only a subset of that could meet the need to be introduced as evidence or supporting evidence within the case. So you need the ability to search on those results. Narrow that down a little bit more so that now you have a review that somebody needs to do. So somebody would need to physically look at those files and determine, yes, this makes sense to include in the case. No, it doesn't make sense to include in the case. That's the tagging process. Anything that is relevant in the case can then be exported, sent to legal counsel, introduced as another admission within the case, but you need the ability to review that. All along the way, that needs to be put on hold so that it's not disturbed and there's no modifications done to the content. So how does that look in real life? So let's go through the configuration within eDiscovery, how it particularly focuses on SharePoint embedded content and how you can use that within your cases. I've created a case within the Microsoft Purview solution of eDiscovery, and you can see that I've got my SharePoint embedded case that's created. Initially, I'm going to see some of the search criteria and activity that I have already configured. If I wanted to create a new search, simply click on Create New Search, give it a name and description, easy enough. But when I go into that search query, now I have the ability to designate what is my data sources. If I add a new data source, then I can simply paste in that link to our SharePoint embedded container. Again, where we get that link is if I go back to my SharePoint Admin Center, focus on what the container is that I want to use within that eDiscovery case. In this case is Project AdventureWorks. I'm going to copy that URL to the container and then simply pasting that into the data sources. You'll see that I have a match. It is unverified, that's okay. But what happens is as soon as we save and close, then a litigation hold is going to be placed on that container. So anytime somebody goes to delete a file through the API that you call, they are going to get an error message saying that, hey, you can't delete this because it's on litigation hold. So yes, there is a preservation hold library that is in that container. But additionally, what it's going to do is it's going to index that within eDiscovery, because now you've got your container that you've identified as the data source. You want to be able to search for information in that container. So again, the scenario is you've got 10,000 documents that are in the container. You may not need all 10,000 documents. You only want to focus on a subset that meets certain keywords or additional conditions that are in the document itself. Maybe it's only happened in the last 60 days where you need to focus on these documents and you've got 5 years worth of content in the container. Now you can start to narrow that down a little bit more. Once you have that narrowed down, that's when you're going to take those results and you're going to add them to a review set. So the review set is the next step in the process where the user now has the ability to go in and uh, literally look at that content and see if that's something that they want to include in the case or not. So in this case, I do have some SharePoint Embedded review set, and I can see that it has the results of one search that I've done, and I can open that for review. So what's happening now is it's going to open that review set, and I'm going to be able to look at the documents in that review set and determine if they are going to be needed in the case or not. So this is where the attorneys, legal assistants, so forth would go through and specifically look at those documents to determine, yes, is this something that I want to include in the case, or no, it's not. And that process is called tagging. Now you can go ahead and tag that document to say, yeah, this is relevant, or no, this has got nothing to do with the case because it's my Starbucks receipt and it just needs to be discarded. Now, as you apply those tags, you can export those content that matches the tags that you have and use that for any external purposes. So if I go to a PDF, for instance, let's go to a good one here. So here's my Roadrunner supply invoice. I believe this is a TIFF image. So I want to demonstrate that not only can you view Word documents in the editor, but now you can also see any of the uh, other types of documents that we support as well. So in this case, it's a TIFF image. We have the TIFF viewer that comes up. You can see if this, again, is relevant to your case. If it is, tag it accordingly. If it's not, then go ahead and discard it. Once you have all the images tagged, now you can export that out, and it will take all the documents that have been indexed in the eDiscovery case that came from the SharePoint embedded container, export those out, and distribute those to the appropriate legal counsel that you want to. So you can see that by identifying the data sets that go into your case, searching on the data set to make sure that it meets the qualifications for the content that you want to focus on. Somebody needs to review that so that you can review and only export out the items that you see as pertinent to the case, and then, of course, exporting that out for external counsel. All of that can be done as a data source within SharePoint Embedded and using that URL from the container that we identified earlier.